Welcome to the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I am the host, Attorney John Khosravi, and I practice U.S. immigration law exclusively. For more information about the program, please visit www.immigrationlawyerspodcast.com. Please note that this recording is informational only and does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with a licensed attorney for specific legal guidance that suits your case. Also, this recording is copyrighted and written permission is required for rebroadcasting. For more information about me, please visit www.jqqlaw.com. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this episode of the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I thought it was an interesting mix. I'm going to be speaking with Alisa Daubenspeck, who is in the nonprofit space for a long time, and she's an expert in that area. And so I want to get her opinion on what's going on. There's some interesting stuff there. And so without further ado, let's get it started. Alisa, thank you so much for coming on board.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So just tell us a little bit about your background, where you came from, how you got involved in the law, and what you're doing right now.
Sure. So I came to immigration through like a sort of convoluted path that started off in high school and sort of learning about, what the U.S. was doing in Latin America and being very upset by what I thought was happening there, and kind of decided I wanted to do something related to that, but wasn't quite sure what it was. So like when I was in high school, I was like, I'm going to fight with the guerrilla because this is so unfair, which obviously would have not been particularly appropriate. But I toned it down over time, and I found immigration law as like a good mix of like working with issues that are important to me, and I think sort of addressing some of the economic damage and political damage that that we have affected abroad, but also just working with people and being able to work one-on-one and get to know them and their lives and have that sort of like human sharing. I really love that about my job.
Wonderful. What part of the country did you grow up in?
I grew up in New Hampshire, which was not super full of immigrants. But then after I graduated from college, I went to volunteer for a year at a shelter in Sierra Juarez. And that was actually where I came across Vawa for the first time, and started realizing, like the effect that immigration laws have on people's lives. And so that was sort of like where I started down the path. So then I ended up volunteering more with immigration nonprofits. And every time I did, I just thought like, oh yeah, this is what I should be doing. I really like, I like knowing things that are useful to people. And I like, just being able to talk with people and talk about life and stuff like that. And there's really no better way to do that than to work on VAWA and U visa cases where you're dealing with like, issues that are very traumatic, and sort of helping people process those in the way that you do as you talk through them for their case. So I really enjoyed that about immigration law. And yeah, so it was just like, it was just a period of, just diving in deeper and deeper and deeper, and then deciding that I wanted to go to law school, and then choosing immigration internships. I ended up interning at CARES in my 2L summer, and
really
doing...
quick, sorry to jump in, but did you take a break from high school to college, or a break from college to law school?
Oh, yeah. Between college and law school, I took a 3-year break. So I was working at the shelter in Sierra Juarez, and then I was working at shelters in Portland, Maine, and then a couple of other things also. But yeah, like kind of trying to find myself, because, like after doing the shelter work, it was sort of easier to get the more like social worky type jobs. But I kind of realized like that's not what I wanted to do. That felt too overwhelming. And I really like immigration law, where it's like, it's like one thing that I can do, and then I can refer people out for other issues that they have, but I don't have to feel like I'm personally responsible for every piece of, somebody's life.
So in your 2L year, when you got started, when what kind of courses were you taking? And because there's a lot of law students that are listening and they want to see how to get involved, what they did to kind of carry on your footsteps. What was your training that you did in law school, and how helpful was that for after you got out?
I would say that very little of my law school experience was relevant. I mean, I imagine most people feel like that, but like I feel like legal writing is important. And then obviously immigration, and I did a clinic. But other than that, like most of it was kind of a distraction. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And for me, like coming in, like knowing that that was what I wanted to do, it was kind of frustrating because I wanted more opportunities to learn what I needed to know.
Would clinics help out?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say like, and summer internships, I think were the most important part, because, that's where you really get the sort of hands-on experience. And then actually taking immigration, I think was incredibly useful because, it's like until you're forced to sit down and just read it, it's like instead of nouns, the INA has, references to other sections of code. So unless you like go down and flip through back and forth, like you don't get it. So just being forced to have the discipline to start to learn to read it was important. But I would say that was being generous, like a third of my law school experience.
So you went to UCLA Law School, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Did you study under Hiroshi Motomura, the professor there, or another professor?
No, it was kind of tragic. He came, I think, the semester after I graduated.
I see.
So when I was there, it was Niels Frenzen, who's the USC professor, who was just what do you call it? Moonlighting?
Oh, okay.
It's not moonlight. I don't know what you call it. But he just came to UCLA. He had office hours and he would teach the immigration class.
Oh, neat.
And he was great, but it's not the same thing as having, an expert on campus who can, be a mentor and stuff like that.
One tough thing about immigration law, having taught myself, is that a lot of courses just go general about it and they want to just recap stuff. And it's hard to get real hardcore into it, or what you got to do as an immigration lawyer. And many times people who practice aren't teaching. So there's that aspect of a person who's just looking over it and generally talking about it, which is needed just to get a good overview of it. But I like for my course, I don't like teaching like policy. I like teaching what the forms are, what the clients are going to say, how to deal with the personality, that really on the ground kind of stuff. Yeah, that's the way to go. But law school is philosophical to a lot of extent when it comes to the legal stuff and thinking about the bar and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, you got to do that stuff too. But I just don't get a kick out of doing it myself. So yeah. What happened after law school? Did you just jump into it? You already had everything lined up, or what were the next steps?
Well, so I I interned at Caressa in my 2L year, and started doing Vawa U visa cases, which I really hadn't done that much of before, but I sort of started to when I was at the shelter. So I think I'd probably put it on my resume, and then my supervisor was like, "Oh, well, you should do this. We don't really have anyone who's working on these cases." So I started taking them on during the summer. And then that year I came back and I was on oh my gosh, I don't even remember what it's called. I think it's called El Centro. It's like a, like nonprofit volunteering club. And they had a VAWA clinic where, students would go and work on VAWA cases. And it had always been in Pacoima. So I moved it to Caressa, and it is still there today, as far as I know. So lots of law students have come through and worked on declarations, but it was actually incredibly helpful because I was so overwhelmed with the number of cases that I had there. So it was actually incredibly helpful to have law students coming in and helping me with the declarations and helping me prepare the cases. So it was actually it was a great thing at the time. And then actually when I graduated from law school, it was right when the U visa regulations got published. So, for people that aren't familiar with the U visa, the law was passed. I want to say the TVPRA was passed in 2000 or 2001, but then it wasn't implemented until 2007 when I started working full time. I guess I was an attorney. I was a law school grad at Caressa. But then it was crazy because it was kind of like a no man's land in the 7 intervening years where people were just kind of sending in their own invented forms to make a prima facie case for a U visa. And then, but there were no immigration forms because there weren't regulations. So finally, once those got published, then everyone who had been sending in, they were called interim relief petitions, had to stop intake and go back and refile their U visa cases on the I-918 form. But because at Carecen, we really hadn't done that many. I think we'd done maybe 14 in the time before I got there. We were the only agency that was open for intake. And because the U visa was getting so much publicity, we just had lines down the street, and people would actually line up the day before, sit out overnight, and then, be first in line for when we opened up intake. And it was basically just me. And there were a couple Jesuit volunteers who were working on these cases, amongst other things.
What part of town
and there was
this?
a part-time. This is in Pico Union, Koreatown area.
It's not the worst part.
So,
I'm thinking downtown or something over oh man, that's scary. But Pico Union.
No. I mean, we were we were afraid that people if they weren't eligible for a U visa before they got there, that they would be afterwards. Because I mean, it was just a crazy time, and I just remember just working nutty hours, and but the good thing was that it helped us develop a very efficient U visa process. So over the years, we've really developed a way to pay attention to exactly what you need to pay attention to, and not spend a lot of time creating work for yourself. And
what is the number of hours on range it takes to do a U visa case?
It totally depends on the case, but yeah. I mean, an easy one would be 10 hours, and then they tend to infinity.
Yeah, it really is. That's why clients call me how long does it take? How much does it cost for the for-profit world? I'm wow, it could be wild ranging. I got to see how you act and what you say and what the situation is. It could be all over the place. But 10 hours.
Yeah, and do you get arrested while the case is pending? Yeah. So many things.
Interesting. So, I guess keep going. So you got I mean, you're dealing with U visas, Vawa. That's the primary specialty now that you have for just probably doing huge amounts of volume of those kind of cases over the last 10 or plus years.
Yeah, I always felt I should branch out, but because I was so busy doing what I was doing, there was really never the space to do that. And I actually ended up leaving Carecen in 2015. So after about 9 years, I went to Neighborhood Legal Services for a couple of years. I went to ICWIC for a short period of time, and then went back to Carecen. And actually, when I went back, I'm now the manager of the DACA and offsite team. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually, I do still do Vawa and U visa because, they come in, when you do general intake, you screen for all relief, and oftentimes because of the, inadmissibility requirements of family-based petitions, oftentimes Vawa and U visa is all that my clients have. Mm-hmm. So, I see and do a lot of them still, but that's not my focus. I would say I probably review, 700 DACAs applications a year, and do a lot of intake review with other staff members, and then I do my own intake. But it's actually really interesting since I left Carecen. There's been a lot more funding for immigration services. So when I left in 2015, there were maybe breaking 25 people, and when I came back, there were 80 in the legal department.
Wow.
It's huge. It's a totally different world, but it's because there's so much more funding available. So the city has funding, the county has funding, the state has funding, and I think it's really great that all of this exists because we're able to expand and do much more than we used to be able to do.
I remember an interesting thing you told me when we last talked was just hiring is a problem now because you have the money, which is usually the problem, but now it's finding people for those positions.
Well, it's crazy because, when I got my job at Cadison, I felt like I'd caught a unicorn because, immigration jobs, they just didn't turn up very often. And it just felt like this was so special. I'd actually, I had applied for, I'd been interning at Cadison, and I applied for a job at the asylum office because Cadison couldn't, promise me funding. And then I got the job at the asylum office, and they were like, okay, we'll give you a job. So, it just felt like this is a special moment. It might never occur again. I need to, the asylum office will always be there, but Cadison won't always be there. And it's just funny to think about like how different it is. And we'll have positions now that are open for months on end because we don't get a qualified candidate, which, for us, it's like, we're pretty, it used to be like we would be able to sort of like narrow down just the people who had like intense immigration experience. And now we absolutely can't do that. Now we're just like, do you speak Spanish? Okay. Are you nice? Come on.
Just have a decent personality and we'll do it. Yeah.
Yes. So it's just a totally different world now.
Now, with regards to the case type, you said you're reviewing tons of DACA cases. Are there any current trends you're seeing with DACA with the changes under President Trump? Are they still approving that? Every once in a while, I'll do an extension request. Obviously, they shut down advanced parole. But is there any trends coming up that they're being difficult about in extension? Is there still kind of a straightforward process?
I feel like I shouldn't say this because I'm going to jinx myself, but I haven't had horrible RFEs or noids or anything like that. I had one case where it got denied for absolutely no reason. Like the client had no criminal history. I really couldn't figure out what it was. I involved this congressperson. She couldn't get any information. And they just said, we just did it on, it was like discretionary security grounds or something like that. And so that was egregious. But other than that, it's like, we really haven't, I think we're somewhat conservative in that we don't have tons of funding for removal defense. And honestly, as we were talking about before, the problem, is both, funding and also just having the staff because those positions are open a lot of the time. But so we won't take on, cases that seem like they're more likely to be denied. But that said, I've done a bunch where a person is arrested for DUI, which obviously would disqualify them, and then, they plead down to wet reckless, and all of those have been approved. So there's room to get cases approved still. I would say it's not like a total culture of no. But again, I don't want to jinx myself.
Yeah. What about the Vawa and U visa side? I know that used to be much more heavier involved in those, but did you see any trends? Years or 10 plus years?
We just got our first NTA on a denied U visa. So that is super sad and upsetting. And it's a client that, who had I think it was assault with a deadly weapon. It was some fairly serious criminal conviction that, we had a sympathetic story for, and we thought we would try it, but, the culture has changed over time. So these cases are pending for so long. I think we submitted it back in like 2014 or maybe early 2015. And it was, it was just a different era. And so everything has changed underneath. And this poor client, we told him, like, if your case gets denied, we've lost, time and effort, but, they don't have a policy of putting into removal proceedings. Yeah. Little did we know 4 years later that was going to change. So that's really awful. So that's a very upsetting thing. And that they're kind of like rolling out the NTA memo on the backs of victims is appalling to me. But it's just the inconsistencies in the execution of the law, and like how you can't really rely on really like a day in, day out. It really seems like a day by day basis when I'm guiding people. I'm like, well, today you could do this. Tomorrow we could get a tweet that says something different. It just I feel like my advice has become so much more tentative. Like I used to be like, oh yeah, this is probably how it's going to go. And now I'm just like, I don't know. Can you read the tea leaves? Because I have no idea.
It's obviously it's horrible for our clients, but even for practitioners, it's a drain to have to tell people that or not know what shoe's going to drop next, because we don't know either. There's just a lot of internal pressure on us as practitioners.
Yeah, I agree. But I do think that, our clients are not unaware of the political situation. So,
That's a
when I tell
plus.
them like, I can't tell you what's going to happen, they're like, oh yeah, no, this is bad. So I do feel like people understand that
The
pretty well.
inconsistency in immigration law, I mean, existed during Obama's time, but because immigrants thought he was like, he was a good guy, they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to believe it when, he was deporting the hell out of people. But now it's kind of like, it's Trump, and that's what I got to say. Like, okay, I understand and stuff. Like when you see these RFEs or notice of intent to denies that are just out there, it's just a huge policy change internally. What about VAWA situations? Has there been a shift? I know U visas, the delay on getting both VAWA and U visas, there's a huge delay, even more than it was for them to even review the case. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think with U visas, I've been to some stakeholder meetings at the Vermont Service Center, and basically they gave us the impression that what they're doing is they're not looking to review cases twice, because what they would have to do if you apply and then it's going to be 10 years before a visa is available,
Mm-hmm.
they don't want to run your prints twice and, like do the adjudication of your case twice. So basically what they're doing, and there's no mandate, so they're just processing, that their unit got, I think, defunded, and they are just processing the cases, 10,000 a year as the visa becomes available. So basically, like, people get the deferred action and then they get a U visa very soon after that. And I think they were just cutting down on their workload because they were like, we don't want to be, looking at these cases twice. But, obviously what that means is that our clients who used to be able to get a work permit in, I don't know, 8 months
Mm-hmm.
are now, I'm telling people, like, I don't expect, if nothing changes, I don't expect anything in the next 10 years, because they go slower
So
each
two
year that
questions
goes
about
by.
that. With the U visas, once you file it, you get automatic deferred action.
No,
Oh,
no, they have to review the case. So it used to be that they would, review your case in maybe under a year and then issue deferred action, and then you would just renew your work permit until you got the U visa. But what they're doing now is just making that part so slow that they basically, I think they're only looking at the case once.
so in the meantime, if
Or
you get an NTA for some reason, you go to court and your U visa hasn't looked at, you're out of luck.
I don't know what's happening. And then I actually don't completely understand that, because there's some pretty good case law that says, like, you have to wait for the adjudication of the U visa.
Mm-hmm.
But I have heard stories, like, on the listserv of people, judges saying, like, oh, your client can, await the U visa in Mexico or
Yeah,
whatever. So
that's what I've been hearing
that's,
too. Like that it's like really harsh where they didn't do that before. Uh, And then even if they don't get a work permit, do you know if like unauthorized employment creates problems for U visa? Or because U visa solves a lot of issues, doesn't it? When even if you entered entry without inspection, the U visa resolves that. Is that correct?
yeah, it basically, you can waive anything except for being like a Nazi or a terrorist, I think. So,
Even false claim or
you know,
two?
yeah, false claims,
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
crime, it's all potentially waivable. Although, in practice has become less so.
Yeah,
I would say still, like, the pure immigration violations aren't difficult. But, crimes have gotten harder and harder because,
yeah.
a lot of our clients have come from really traumatic backgrounds. A lot of, really hard stuff has happened to them. And, they haven't necessarily had the example set for them of, people, like like, I'll just have clients who they come from gang families and,
Mm-hmm.
they sort of get involved early in life and then realize that's not what they want and, move on and, convincing immigration that, this is what this person was born into, but is not, who they are today. Even if their last arrest was, like, I don't know, 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard. And I think there's also the issue of, like, the people who are adjudicating these cases are in Vermont and Nebraska and, like, not necessarily, don't necessarily understand what life is like in Los Angeles or, the sort of major population centers where people are applying for U
Yeah,
visa.
I mean, some of these places you're fighting just to live. It's like, yeah, even in America, it's a pretty tough time to go through.
Yeah, yeah. But like, theoretically it's waivable. So like, our client, I'm trying to remember what the facts were of that case, but I think he had like a assault charge, which was, it was like a sympathetic story. Like he was not the, primary aggressor, and I think he had kids and ended up like pleading guilty so that he could get back to his kids because he had to work, and just sort of kind of heartrending stuff, but they did not buy it. So it's kind of, while theoretically possible, I would say it's much more dangerous now to apply in those sort of difficult cases than it used to be.
What about Vawa cases? Is Vawa reminiscent of you, or you file and you wait to get a work permit, or how does that work?
Well, it's funny because the Vawa used to be like the slow remedy, right? So like I remember like if I had a domestic violence case, where there's a police report and the abuser was the U.S. citizen, or sorry, the LPR husband, I would do a U visa instead of Vawa because they would get their, green card and work permit faster through a U visa. Now that's unbelievable to me. So I'm always very excited if I can find a Vawa because, particularly if someone's adjustment eligible, they can get their work permit within 3 months of applying. So that can be a huge help. And I've had lots of clients who kind of wait for that to be able to leave their relationship. And then once they can work legally, they're able to, to get out and start making a life for themselves.
Well, how is it the experience of doing high volume these kind of cases? Like in Vawa kind of cases, have you had husbands or spouses come after you guys, or is there an extra security where you are because of that kind of the chaotic nature of the life of the clients coming on you guys, both in a sense of some, angry husband coming in, or just mentally absorbing all this sad energy?
I mean, well, that's definitely an issue, but the security issue, we have a policy, so we'll talk to people in the first consultation and we'll say, it's really important that you don't tell your abuser that you're doing this for our security. And, it's like at the end of the day, it doesn't affect the abuser in any way. It's civil proceedings, if there've already been criminal proceedings, like the damage is done for them. This is not doing anything more, but of course they're not going to believe that. So before I got to Carson, we did have an abuser who was like calling one of the paralegals and yelling at her and threatening her and stuff like that. So that was how we instituted the policy of like just having that conversation at the first appointment. And so, I have never had anything scary happen, knock on wood. But, certainly like the thought crosses my mind, I had a client once whose abuser was a narco, and I was just like, ooh, this could be rough. And there's been others like, in sort of like high up government positions and things like that, where I'm just like, oh, hopefully this all goes the way it's supposed to. But yeah, I mean, so far our I think just explaining the issue to clients has helped keep that from happening again. And then in terms of like the vicarious trauma, I think it's an issue that everybody on the staff deals with a lot. And I like to, I think it's kind of changed the way that I think about life because I see my clients being so strong in the face of all of these things that happen to them that are, not their fault and just seem like just horrible. I don't know if it's luck or, what you would call it, but like, but then just like turning around and giving so much love to their kids and like trying to make things better. And so I feel like what I try to take away from, my clients' stories is the resilience and just how, people thrive even when the deck is stacked against them. And so like, just like utter respect for that. And I try to focus on that at the end of the day instead of just the horrible things that have happened to them, because that stuff is just, it's unbearable. It's like, there's just so much suffering in the world.
Usually, I mean, I'm assuming these are females that are coming, their husbands, the typical scenario are the abusers. And I'm guessing they're not working or making money. Like, how do they deal with the fact, like, okay, because they make the Vawa claim, but I mean, they don't really have, they're the foreign national here. They don't necessarily have connections or family members or an education or skills or money and all that kind of stuff. Is that a fair characterization? Am I just stereotyping? And if not fully stereotyping, how do they deal with that? Like, take on the risk of being like, okay, I'm just going to go through this and risk losing the spouse who's financially supporting them. How do they take care of themselves in these scenarios?
Well, I think, it's totally different depending on the person. And so we'll see people that come from more means, but due to the domestic violence are in a more desperate situation where they wouldn't be able to afford a private attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's people that, I think life has been pretty harsh too from the very beginning. I would say I see a lot of clients, just put one foot in front of the other and get a job and, do it well and move up. I have a lot of clients that become CNAs with the intent of moving on to being nurses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's hard. I think people really work hard, but I do see a lot of clients that, really put that effort in to care for their families at the same time as they're kind of moving forward with something that's going to support their families better. And I have so much respect for that because, I just feel like things were handed to me in such a different way. So, I can't imagine how resilient I would be under different circumstances, but I have a lot of respect for it.
How old, it just popped in my head, thinking in 2019, there's still people who hit their wives or hit their husbands. It's like I mean, because I'm 35. When I was a kid, I looked at 35-year-old as an old man. So I'm like the adult in the room, and people probably see me. I'm in my suit and stuff. They think I'm like some adult and all that. It's like I can't imagine hitting my wife or my kids. And it's like, but that still happens. Whoops, yeah. But it's like, I mean, how old are they like? Because I'm thinking it's probably like an older generation, someone who's like their 60s. But there must be, I mean, probably. To tell my own life, I've seen abuse, the family abuse myself, but I always said like I don't want to be like that. I come from a foreign background where it was like, I mean, in Iran, like it was teachers could hit you in school and it was all good. Maybe nowadays it's different, but when I went to school there a couple of years, I got good grades, so I never got hit. But if a kid was not doing good, a teacher would hit him with a stick and like kick him and stuff like that. I was like normal. It was pretty catastrophic. I can't believe that was okay. But I always think like everyone thinks America is different, all this kind of stuff. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of foreign country nationals too, but then again, a lot of them have American Caucasian husbands. Not anything like to say like it's just foreign people doing this, but it's crazy that like people are still doing that. I'm guessing a lot of the couples are in their 20s. Then again, if you're in your 20s and you don't have an education, you don't have money, you've been in a gang, hitting your spouse is not that different. You're going outside and it's maybe hitting people in the street, so it's not that different. But it just sucks that like people have to fear physical violence in their daily lives. It's such a scary thing, yeah. And what's worse about physical,
what you're saying, it becomes normal. So if you grow up with that in your family, like you don't have another way. Like that is how anger is expressed, or frustration, or what have you. So I mean, God forbid we were raised in different, circumstances. Who knows what we would be doing, but I do think that it's really like important for there to be social norms and, to the extent that trauma can be addressed and things like that, like, and people could be given other, methods. Like, I've had clients that have had, they've had arrests or citations for, hitting a child, or, DCFS cases opened up and stuff like that. And they'll go to classes and it's like, that's the first time that anyone's given them other ways to discipline their kids. And it's not that they want to hurt anybody, but it was just that was what they did without thinking about it. And so I think, the way that, people can be educated and, and stuff like that. That's hopeful, because I think, I think there's bad people out there, but I think most people aren't bad. I think most people just don't really know what to do, and we're kind of like stumbling through. So.
Yeah, they don't have the tools to be able to handle this and too much pressure. But like you said, like the case you get, it's not always the stereotype of some poor, foreign community kind of person. You get people that are wealthy. You might get people with power. I mean, like you see all the time in the news, there'll be like judges and like high up people who turn out to be like abusing children, kidding people. They're educated. It's like the money and education doesn't necessarily mean anything. They just know how to cover it better than other people. It's just, it seems like a virus that just exists in society, abuse and of all kinds. And like getting rid of it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. It's just, they got better at hiding it to a certain extent for a lot of communities. I laugh just because it's such a miserable situation. Like I always, my coping mechanism is laughing at horrible situations I don't mean to laugh at. But it just, and that's the one thing I can't do humanitarian stuff, because it really, like I can't, it's mind-boggling to me when I see this stuff, and I kind of want to go and beat up the husband. Talking about not being violent, sometimes I've had clients for removal of conditions, and they'll be like secretly like, well, my spouse hits me, I want to leave, but like I don't want to lose removal of conditions. I'm like, dude, leave, you could get a waiver for that. But they're like, no, I don't want to risk it and stuff. And I just the husband, I'm looking at him later or talking with them, and I didn't want to look at them, because it's like I know what the person's up to and what kind of craziness they're doing, it just angers me. I can't handle that stuff. I'm glad there's people like you who have the discipline to do it without losing your mind. So I'm sure there's a part of you that has to kind of be super professional and not just so you won't take it home with you, kind of like doctors who deal with sick patients all the time. Like, is that you got to have to shut off certain judgments or certain beliefs and just go do the work? Does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of when I gave up on the idea that life was supposed to be perfect, it made it a little bit easier to just, sort of be like sit with people as we like deal with the fallout from all the crap that happens to people in their lives. So I think I did like change my outlook a little bit, but then I also, like I try to do things to clear my mind. So I really like rock climbing, and I like hiking and stuff like that. And those are things that like where I can just like, detach myself from all of it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's like kind of the constant struggle. And I guess after some point you kind of hear a lot of the same stuff. It's actually kind of shocking. And I think it's actually a reason why group therapy is really helpful for people, because there's so many things that are like the same in lots of abusive relationships. And they're like little things, like little humiliations, but that you just see like pop up over and over again. So I think it's helpful for people to be able to share that, because, as someone who sits and listens to it, there's just like weird things that like, abusers do to be horrible. But that's like, it's just very similar. But then it's like you kind of get used to listening to that, so that it ends up being like the things that are most disturbing are the things that are new and different that you haven't heard before. And then always like things involving children are just, and pets it's just, those are horrifying.
How is it different having from the time you graduated, what you thought this career was till now? And you're still doing it, assuming you still enjoy it, and it gives you eternal benefits of satisfaction of helping these people. But is it very different than when you started or when you got out of law school, or is it kind of follow the same path, the work and what's involved and what your life is today after going through it?
It's funny because I was a women's studies and Latin American studies major in college. And I feel like that's one of those things that like, you're like, what's that person going to do when they grow up? But I feel like, what I fell into made a lot of sense. And I think a lot of it comes from like really appreciating the work that women do in the world in terms of like holding families together and, like receiving violence, but then like giving love, and just like a lot of admiration for that. So I think that, my work has really like cemented that, because I feel like, there's exceptions. Like, so, I wouldn't say that every single one of my clients is like an amazing, above average human being, but I would say that like a lot of my clients have just like really good and like loving responses to the horrible things that have happened to them that I find very inspiring. And I think it's why I started, in that direction. And it's definitely what's like kept me doing that. So like, even now that I'm doing general work, when I come across a Vawa or UV visa case, I'm always happy to find that and to work on that area. So yeah.
So how does the structure of your nonprofit work now? You're a managing attorney. How many staff members and associates, that kind of stuff, does it have?
Okay, so we have our legal director. We have, I want to say 5 managing attorneys, and then maybe like 25, maybe 30, I'm not sure, staff attorneys, and then legal assistants and OLAP representatives. So people who have enough experience practicing immigration law at a nonprofit that although they don't, they're not licensed to practice law, they can represent clients in front of immigration, and then they can actually get to the point where they're representing people in front of EOIR as well. So the $160,000 that I took out for my law school education was not completely necessary.
Well, the California bar is doing its best to make it completely unnecessary as well. That's another show. But I mean, that's a huge operation for an immigration firm. That's like considered a medium to large size firm with that many attorneys.
Yeah, and it's presented a lot of challenges just in terms of like, how do you monitor the work? And when I started there, I was the second attorney. And I want to say there were like 7 of us. So it's grown, exponentially. And there's always those growing pains as you try to, make the systems that worked for 7 people work for, 80 people. So that's like, it's a constant dilemma as to like, how do you, and as you well know, there's so much damage that you could do in immigration law if you don't know what you're doing. Like, even if you have the best intentions, if you don't have good supervision, you can do a lot of damage. So just how do you monitor 80 people?
What kind of mechanism do you have any software you use, or is there like just ways you have to keep, what do you do to keep track of that much movement?
Yeah, we use e-immigration by Serenade, and I really like it. Like it's, we used it for probably 5 years or something like that, and never really implemented all of its functions. And then when I came back to Curtis and I had some time because I wasn't overloaded with cases yet, so I really sat down and figured out like, how do we enter all of the data that we need? How do we populate the reports that we need? So now I can sit down with my staff and like, run a case report and see what's going on in all of their cases, and I can review their intakes to make sure that, the analysis was done properly. And it's just like, it's a totally different world. Cause like basically what we used to do was have a case review where people would bring their questions. Cause that was all we had really the technology to be able to do. So it was like, it was up to each legal worker to like identify what were the important questions in this case. So now we're able to have much more oversight. But it's definitely been a process of implementing that for sure.
So do you like working within such a larger group, or did you like it more when you're more close to the people like that? To clients?
Well, like I really like my clients, and I like working with clients. I feel like that's the most rejuvenating work for me. So, I like working with people, and I like, the staff that I work with. But I would say that's probably not where my heart is as much as working directly with clients. So, but it's like when you get to be this big, you kind of need people who can monitor. And unfortunately, there's just not that many people. So, like I said, we've had, job positions opened for, months at a time. So it's just, to some extent, like I feel like I need to jump in where I'm needed as opposed to where I would most want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me too, like I can only see myself working directly with the clients, because that is what rejuvenates you. That's a good term. Like sometimes I'll be like frustrated with the client because they'll email me, they'll say ridiculous stuff or not give me documents, and I want to like yell at them, but as soon as I see or hear their voice, I just calm down and just talk with them, and it resets things, and I kind of understand where they're coming from in their own life. And that's what the best part is. So many practice areas, you don't get to see the client, or you're dealing with the HR, or it's just some this idea that client's an idea. It's not an actual person, but really get to deal with the person who's having the problem, talk with them and see their side of the world. And that's just the coolest thing about immigration. I can't detach myself from that. So if I was going to grow and stuff and be a manager, it would get harder and harder the more distant I get from the core of the duties.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you have to look at it as like, you're participating in the future of, immigration law in Los Angeles. And, like, I hope that the people that I'm training are going to go on to, do good things in their practice and stuff like that, and have good habits and,
that's it.
Review their cases and things like that. And like, hopefully that will have an effect, but it's a much more, like, it's not as much immediate bang for your buck as it is to, like, sit down with a client and, like, they come in stressed out and you're able to assure them that it's going to be okay and they leave happier. Like, that's like priceless.
Yeah. It's like you kind of 10x what you do, because you have all these people that you teach, and then they're helping so many more people. The influence is much wider. And you also deal with the lawyers, so you're dealing with fun people and nice people. But there's something you said right now I wanted to comment on, but I forgot what it was. But it's just it's such an interesting space, the business and the management side of a practice. And I've always shied away from the management side because it seems like all this work that I'm not sure is going to be as fun. As long as things are fun, I'll do it no matter how hard it is. But I just get such a kick out of directly working with clients, and it seems like it's a lot more work. But then again, who knows? Like, you enjoy your staff and the people you work with. There's a joy that comes out of working with them too. So I'm probably not giving enough credit to that. But someone's got to be the boss. It's not something you can just find off the street and put in your position. So sometimes duty calls, and you gotta do what you gotta do.
For sure. Yeah. And I have also enjoyed, like, the problem solving of, like, how do you, create a report that, like, accurately like reflects what somebody's working on, and, like, how, like, and then, troubleshooting it to see if it's really getting the information that you want it to get, and, like, thinking down the line, like, well, is this the right way to do this? Is there a better way? So I have enjoyed that, but I guess the problem is that, like, when I get too bogged down with my own work, then it's like I don't have the bandwidth to sort of think of the bigger picture things that I think ultimately make me happy. Because it is really hard, like, the way that we do it at Credison, it's not like I'm just managing other people's cases. Like, I do have my own cases, which is, like, it keeps me feeling more alive probably, but it's also, like, just that tension of the, like, giving other people's cases the same weight as I give my own. And treating their cases
look
like
in a nonprofit? What do the hours look
like?
What'd you say? How do the hours look like in a nonprofit? Is it a 9 to 5 kind of job, or is it all hours kind of thing?
I can occasionally work 9 to 5, but if I do it for a week in a row, then I get really behind. So I would say, like, it varies, and there's times that I can, cut out because I'm between things and stuff like that. But I would say particularly at Credison, because we have very low barriers to service. So we're not charging our clients. We don't have much by way of, like, requirements to obtain our services. We're basically available to almost anyone. And so the good part about that is that we're low barrier and we're serving the community. But the problem is that, it's just like this constant stream of work. Like, there's no end in sight ever. Like, I remember in the 9 years that I worked there before I left, I think there were 2 days that I left being like, I got this. Every other day I was like, oh my God, I'm committing malpractice. I should spend the night here. But, and then it was funny moving to legal aid where, they see VAWA and U visa clients, but they in general can't see undocumented clients because of the FSC restrictions. So then, and also just the process to get in there, like, people would have to wait on the phone for, hours to get through the intake. And there was just, it was like more barriers to service. But so that was bad, obviously, but then it made for like a very livable job where I could, work normal hours and not, like I would leave almost every day being like, I got this.
What kind of cases would they
But
handle, like
then,
gnats and stuff like that?
yeah, they can do gnats and they can do Vawa and Uvisa. They can do asylum. They do citrus. So, there's stuff that they can do, but it's just like a more limited world. In Carson, we do tons of family-based, and they can't do that.
And where does Crescent get, if you could talk about this, where is their main source of funding?
I think our main source right now is the state, which really stepped up after Trump was elected and created a lot of funding opportunities for immigration services, which is awesome. I mean, and it's really expanded the services in the city of Los Angeles. The not awesome part is that like all of the nonprofits are competing for, the same tiny pool of candidates that is bilingual and has any immigration experience. So it's been interesting how that's really become the struggle is, it never was hard to fill positions. And now it's like, it's really hard.
That's good to know for those in law schools, because most law schools nowadays, at least in California, have clinics. So there is a next step forward that's available for you. I mean, if you're at a clinic, you speak Spanish, that's like an ideal candidate, I'm assuming.
Yep. Come, we need you.
Alisa, thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there a good way for people to contact you or learn more about your work?
Sure. My email is A Daubenspeck, so ADAUBENSPECK at Carecen, which is CARECEN-LA.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.